Good, and we're recording now, and we'll have that up on our website later. So Alicia, you can go ahead and introduce yourself and then dive right in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Lindsay, and I do work with for PPD in our Talent Acquisitions Department, leading our university and diversity inclusion programs. I've put together some virtual interviewing tips for you, and just also some general interview tips. It can never hurt to feel prepared. So I always say that the interview process really starts with your application. So really from the start, put your best foot forward. Just a few tips here. So attach your resume as both a PDF and Word document. You never know with these crazy applicant tracking systems. They're all a little different. Sometimes you just never know what the best formatting is going to be for a company. So it can't hurt to just offer both. Also, some of the applicant tracking systems request that you include a resume snapshot. So if they do, I 100% recommend that you do that so that it just adds a little bit extra to your profile and could potentially set you apart from another candidate if they don't have that. Make sure you complete the full application. That's a no-brainer, but just check and double check and just make sure everything is complete before you submit. A lot of times these tracking systems actually don't let you go back and edit certain areas, so it's important to make sure that you've completed it your first try. And then also feel free to follow up if you have a contact within the company and you've applied and you haven't heard back yet. I always recommend taking the initiative and reaching out to see if they could provide you with some feedback, and just be respectful of the way you're reaching out and following up as well, and don't kind of like over follow up. I guess that's the way you could put it.
And Alicia, that's a great point, and I hate to interrupt you so soon.
No.
And you might bring it up later, but that's a question we get all the time in the Career Center is students asking how soon should they follow up, or is there a certain timeline? So do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so for the application itself, I would recommend if you haven't heard back in 2 weeks, I would follow up after 2 weeks. If it is an interview, and we'll get into this kind of with some of the interview tips, but I always recommend if it's a screen or a phone interview or a face-to-face or virtual interview, one of the questions you should be asking at the end of the session is, when can I expect to hear back? And that by that date, if you have not heard back yet, it is absolutely appropriate to reach out at that point, but I would say not before that point if they've given you a date. If they haven't and you maybe forgot to ask that question, I would recommend a week. A week's time is fair. And if you've followed up and they've responded, but you're waiting maybe another couple days or so for another response, I'd say like week time periods, it's appropriate to follow up, I would say once a week.
Thanks.
Yeah, I see there might be a question in the chat box. I'm not sure.
No, I think that was just Emily's original message to the
sorry. Is there a way for me to adjust that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I'll keep an eye on the chat, Alicia, so if I see any pop in during your presentation, okay, I'll definitely let you know.
Awesome. All right. So just some general interview tips. So for general questions, we recommend, be prepared to explain the experience you have on your resume, your skills, any areas of opportunity for you. That's what I like to call your weaknesses, your interests, and any career goals. So take a look at the job. What experiences have you had that you think actually relate to this role? What about yourself sets you apart and makes you a strong candidate? What are your areas of improvement, and what are you doing to address them? So don't ever bring a weakness to an interview without also having a way that you're addressing it and working to improve on those areas of opportunity. And then a lot of companies do employ behavioral-based interviewing questions. So maybe they have a predetermined set of skills that they require for their various positions. Some examples of these specific to PPD, these are some ones that we use, and for some other companies I've worked with as well, like things like decision-making, problem-solving, teamwork, communication, planning and organization, critical thinking skills, different things like that. So consider preparing and thinking of some examples from your experience, whether that be internships or school or, you know, projects, things like that, where you have demonstrated some of these top behaviors and skills that employers are typically seeking. Some of your examples should be positive, such as accomplishments or meeting goals or different things like that. But you should also think about some negative situations as well, that maybe they started out negative, but then you were able to turn them into a positive at the end. So it's important to think of both ends there. Going off of those interview tips, one of the best ways that I recommend interviewing, whether it's a behavioral-based question or not, is using the STAR method, which stands for situation, task and action, and result. And it's just the perfect way to give a well-rounded answer, like the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I think that the result or the end is oftentimes the most important. So don't go through the situation, don't go through everything that you did, and then forget to give the interviewers what the result was. And if you can, try to ensure that that result in the example that you're giving ended with a positive. You always want to make it end on a positive.
And Alicia, that's a really good point. And just because
Yeah.
I love that example, and I just wanted to hear your opinion on, do you think that makes a more memorable candidate? Because I always find when somebody's interviewing, if they have a story and they can also answer your question and talk a little bit about that skill, it also makes them stand out and it's much more memorable. So if you're interviewing a handful of people, it helps in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you're giving an example of something that you've already done and showing it as an example that way, it sets you apart because it's different than you saying, well, I would do this or something like that. You're already showing that you have successfully done what the question is asking, and showing, and then it really, I think, can make interviewers picture how you might respond to some situations in the job based on the situations that you've already been successful in, whether they're directly related or not. They can kind of see the behaviors that you already have, and like I said, the behaviors of those skills like critical thinking and problem solving and teamwork that can then mesh into the environment for the job that you're looking at.
Agreed.
Awesome. So here we'll get into some tips that are actually specific to virtual interviews. One thing just to note though is that you should treat a virtual interview the same that you would treat any other interview. It's just that you're looking at somebody from a computer screen and it can feel a little bit less personal, but here's some tips to make yourself kind of take it to the next level. So watch your body language. Looking into the camera actually gives the impression that you're making eye contact with somebody. So I know it can be really easy to want to either look at yourself or look at the other person. But actually, if you're looking at the camera, it really mimics eye contact. Minimizing fidgeting or wiggling. I have a really hard time with this. I use my hands a lot, and I'm just a fidgety person in general. But one thing that I found that's been really helpful is to make sure that I'm sitting in a stable, non-swivel chair. I'm the type of person, if I'm in a swivel chair, like I will swivel on it. And so you just want to minimize any type of, body movement like that, especially if your internet connection could potentially get a little spotty. Those harsh movements can pixelate things a bit if you're not careful. Also, vary your vocal delivery. So over the computer, sometimes the way your microphone picks up, it can lead to monotone speaking. Maybe you just kind of get on a roll. Try smiling when you're talking. It kind of mimics enthusiasm. Listen clearly. So if somebody's asking you a question, especially it's so important virtually to make sure that the person on the other end is done talking before you begin talking. That can be easy to interrupt each other, and that can potentially just leave them feeling maybe that you're like interrupting them. And then also, this is another one I have a hard time with, but speak slowly and clearly. It's really important to enunciate your words. And like I said, with microphones, you just don't know how your microphone could be picking things up and different sounds, and just try to speak as clearly and slowly as possible. prepare yourself like you would any other interview. You want to arrive on time, or preferably arrive a little bit early. You want to prepare that list of questions to have, and you're actually at a really great advantage now by being virtually, because you can really keep a lot of notes and questions and things like that, whereas, and you know, if you're in person, you still want to bring something to write on and take notes, but they can't really see to the level that you've really prepared virtually. And then also, with being prepared, you do want to sound prepared. Like, you want to sound like you've researched the job and the company, and thought about some skills that you have that you want to share, but you don't want to sound super rehearsed. You don't want to, with maybe having those prepared notes and things, sound like you're reading off of a script. Going back to kind of being monotone and sounding a little bit robotic, that being over rehearsed can really take away some of the personality from your interview. Also, minimize your distractions. This one is especially hard right now because it's not just you at home. Probably there's a lot of people at home. You probably have animals, things like that. So just trying to keep those interruptions to a minimum, and being super open with whoever's in your home with you that you have an important interview. Please be quiet, maybe put your animals outside if possible, things like that. But also what's helpful is you know, maybe not having your phone with you, making sure it's on do not disturb, closing any of those other windows that you might have up, your Skype IMs, things like that, Facebook, anything that could potentially cause a distraction, just making it as minimal as possible. And then finally, ready your technology and environment. It's so important to make sure that you're testing your equipment in advance. A lot of times, the talent acquisitions or recruiter that you work with, they are more than happy prior to your interview to test that technology with you. So don't hesitate to either reach out to your recruiter or coordinator if you want to just practice signing on and making sure that everything's running smoothly, that your microphone's working, that even to see what the lighting in your room looks like. And like the next thing, making sure that the room is well lit but not too bright. Contrast can be really weird on computers sometimes, so just preparing that ahead of time and making sure that it looks good. And then also making sure that you're in a place with a simple background, either blank, or especially if it's not blank, it's clean. That can really set a good impression for the interviewers, or set a bad impression. I can't tell you how many times we've had people who've just had really, really strange backgrounds for their video interviews.
It does come up. Yeah.
They did not put a lot of thought into.
Yes, and actually I have a question that I'd love to just bring up for the students who are in, and then we do have a question in the chat, so I'll ask you that one too. But especially this time, where normally if you had roommates or a dog or something and you were going to go to maybe a library or somewhere quiet to do it, if obviously right now students don't really have that option, would you rather have a candidate kind of give you a little heads up, you know, hey, you might hear this noise? Is that something you would prefer?
Absolutely. And your interviewers at home are probably having the same situation as you right now, whether it's roommates or family or children, or, you know, just being like, we're all people and we all have lives. So being upfront and just letting them know, hey, I have 3 pretty noisy roommates. They're aware of my interview, but you know, I can't control their actions. So just being upfront is
yeah,
totally
probably a little bit easier, because that way if something starts happening, you both are kind of on the same page. And we do have a question from Bailey, or sorry, Summer. Are there any specific questions that are good to ask? So I'm wondering, are you talking about specific questions to ask your interviewers, like wrap-up questions?
Yeah, so wrap-up questions, those are so important. Like I said previously too, asking about the timeline, that just helps to set yourself up for success. But in addition to that, some great questions are really to ask about your interviewer themselves, like ask them about their career, what their career has looked like, questions about the culture of the company. That can also give you some really important information about whether or not the team and everything is a good fit for you, because you're interviewing the company as well. You want to make sure that that if you are given an offer, you can confidently see yourself performing on that team and in that role. So this is your time too to interview the team. And then also questions, kind of just some general questions about what makes a strong candidate. Like if they're asking if somebody was in this role previously and didn't succeed, why did they not succeed? Different things like that, that will again set yourself up for success if you are to enter into this role.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing too. That was one of my favorite questions to ask is if you have looked up who you're interviewing with and you can find them on LinkedIn. You know, if you're interviewing with somebody who's worked at the company for 17 years, that's a really good topic to bring up. Like, why have you been working there? Why do you love it? So it's a great way to kind of connect and show your interest, but in a really professional way. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And Summer says, thank you for answering that question.
Great question. Yeah, and honestly, one of the worst things you can do for an interview is come without any questions. So it's great to prepare them ahead of time. All right, well, great. Well, just finally then, just a few follow-up tips. So asking, like I said, asking about that timeline at the end of your screener interview, that's going to set you up for understanding when you can send additional follow-ups. Sending a thank you email, I think it does go a long way, and it shows that you've taken the extra step of being interested now in the role after your interview. Connect with people on LinkedIn. I mean, as long as your LinkedIn is good and updated and it looks professional, feel free to connect with people on LinkedIn. And again, you can even just connect and send a note and say, thank you so much for my interview. I learned a lot and I'm really interested in next steps, etc. And then again, following up based on the timeline that's given to you, that's just an example of following directions. So at the very minimum, that's an example of following directions. So it shows that you've at least done that. All right, well, great. So does anybody have any other questions or anything about interviews or virtual interviews that I could help with?
Yeah, and feel free to put your question into the chat and I can read it for you. If you want to unmute yourself and ask that way, that's absolutely fine. And I do have a couple questions parred up if you don't get one in the next minute.
Awesome, thanks, Emily.
And I personally just love this topic, I think, because interviewing can be definitely a very stressful thing and definitely a little anxiety inducing for students who haven't done it before or getting ready to graduate. But I do think it's really just kind of preparing yourself and just kind of getting ready. I mean, one of the things, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is we have students in the Career Center who really just kind of are worried about what kind of questions they're going to get, like what are they going to ask. So can you talk a little bit about maybe how you prepare your questions? My advice a lot of times is get very familiar with the position description. You know, that's going to give you a really good indicator. It's almost like a secret little outline of like what they're possibly going to ask you, because a lot of times it's not, you're not necessarily just trying to stump anybody. You're just trying to see if they have the background that matches. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Emily, and that's exactly the first thing that I would recommend is become familiar with the job itself and become familiar with the key skill sets that it looks like this job would need, and then take a look at your resume and your experience. And you should be tailoring each resume to each position that you're applying to or interviewing for. So you can take a look at that and really pull out so if you have a bullet, pull out a bullet and think about the specific experience and the situation that you were in, so that you can tell it almost as a story. Is a really great way. And a lot of times, a lot of the situations that you've had can be used across a lot of different competencies. So working on group projects, that's pretty much showing giving examples of how you've worked on teams, how you've managed time, how you have had problem solving experiences, things like that. One of the areas I think that I know our managers ask is, can you give us an example of a time that you dealt with a difficult team member, or give us an example of time you dealt with a difficult client or customer or something like that, because it's so important to see how you're going to react to those situations. And we're a very team-based company, and also see how you're able to turn negative situations with people into positive experiences for everyone that's involved. So that's just an example of a question that I think everybody should be prepared to answer.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's great advice. And I even just, having been graduated for a while now, this is something I sometimes tell students to do, is if you did something you're really proud of, or a project or something, write it down, write down the details, what you did, how you completed it. Because it's, if you go on and get, years from now, you haven't worked in that position, but maybe you're applying to a job where that experience has become really relevant, it's important to still be able to talk knowledgeably about it. So keep a little archive of kind of what you've done, your experiences, your data, and that can really help you prepare, especially if you maybe haven't been in that role in a couple of years. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is interview questions. So I sometimes after an interview write down interesting questions or difficult questions, having like a little archive. So do you recommend kind of keeping those difficult ones aside and practicing them later?
Yeah, absolutely. And going off of practicing too, career services is such an awesome place. I know that when I was in college, I went to my career service professionals to get help not only on my resume, but interview skills as well. Your career services center is full of professionals that are dedicating their time to helping you guys and helping your search for a career. So I think it's so important to have that relationship and go in and practice those questions. And the professionals in Career Services Center are going to also have examples of other questions that other students have brought to them from different companies and things like that. And you just never know how they can help you prepare, whereas you might not even have that information if you're just preparing yourself.
Yeah, I would also say, and Alicia, I think you would agree with me on this, but in regards to preparing, you, like Emily said, want to have a good knowledge of the role that you're interviewing for and really base a lot of those questions on the position, but also doing that research, like you mentioned, on the company and understanding the mission and the values and how that aligns with your goals and who you are, and asking some questions about that and understanding like that from a company perspective as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Just a PPE example. So we have 5 defining principles, and our interviewers are all trained on taking a look at how people answer questions and if they successfully align with our defining principles. So, and those are posted on our website. We talk about them in depth. So I'm sure a lot of other companies have a similar, whether they're defining principles or their mission or all of that. Anytime you can relate something like that back to the company's values, then that will also set you apart and just further show and let the managers see how they can like really see you as a member of their team.
Yeah, I think also too, I mean, you and I have both sat in the recruiter chair for those students when we talk about having questions prepared. It's like if you go into an interview and you've come with a list of questions written down, and even if you feel like they've answered every single one of your questions, do not leave that interview at the end if they say, do you have any questions, and still not ask questions. So whether you roll it back and say, hey, this was one of my questions, you asked this, you mentioned this earlier, can you elaborate? Maybe taking mental notes of things that they've said and then asking more questions about that, because it really is in the eye of a manager, like someone not asking questions means that maybe you're not a learner or you're not inquisitive. Even if you feel like all your questions were answered, they still want you to have questions.
Yes.
And another thing that's relevant just to the practicing, like Alicia was saying, definitely feel like you can come into the Career Center, meet with a counselor, do a mock interview. We also have online software. It's called Big Interview, where you can go in, and it's actually really, really nice because you can do it at home. Say it's kind of a short turnaround, you don't have time to make an appointment. You can do practice questions. You can actually record your answers and play them back. And you can even pick questions based off of maybe an industry that you're interviewing for, a particular skill that you're hoping to really kind of to sell yourself on. And the beauty of that is it's a little bit more, it's going to mimic a natural interview a little bit more because you're not looking up the questions. When it's going through and sending you random questions, it just has a little bit of that real interview feel where someone's kind of throwing a question at you. So it really is just about practicing. It's about kind of slowing yourself down, being prepared, and just kind of, getting the information out there that you think the recruiter needs to know. I think it's really important.
That's super awesome. Cool. It's really cool that UNCW supplies that for their students. That's great. And one thing I didn't mention just about general interview questions too is that it's okay if you don't have an answer to a question right off the bat. Don't let that make you too nervous. Let them know, oh, that you could say, that's a really great question. Can you give me a second to think about that? And then, you can take a couple seconds to really take a breath and think. And then if you do have prepared some bullets of some areas ahead of time, you can look, and a lot of times that'll give you enough time for your brain to spark an answer.
Well, and I know that obviously virtual interviewing has become a big hot topic because of COVID-19, but yeah. From my perspective, and probably yours, because I know how heavily you recruit, not just in the Wilmington area, what percentage of virtual interviews would you say you were doing prior to this, as far as like it being important for students to know these tips even when there's no coronavirus? Because a lot of companies aren't going to necessarily fly you in first round. Like there's a lot of companies already doing virtual interviews to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you the exact percentage, but it's a lot. We do a lot of virtual interviews for a variety of levels of positions. Like it doesn't, we have senior leadership positions where some of them we are doing virtual interviews because in addition to us being we're a global company too. So oftentimes you'll have interviewers from other countries that are joining as well.
And do you have a preference? This one I feel like just comes up a lot, obviously, because college students are, so accessible with smartphones, and everyone has Zoom, Skype. Is there any advice versus sitting down at a laptop and having your video interview, or having it on your phone? Is that something that you kind of one holds more weight than the other?
I would say it's always best if you can do it from a laptop, just because of the angles and everything you're going to have. From your phone, if you're going to use a phone, just make sure it's propped up and you're not like holding it to do your interview, because you still do want, like if you're using your hands or you're talking and everything, all of those little things bring out your personality. And if you're doing it on a phone like this, it does seem a little bit less, I think, one, professional. It shows that you're not really probably prepared and you haven't really set yourself up in a location for the interview. Like if you're using just your phone like that, it could just look like, oh, you're just kind of fitting this into your day.
Well, I think that's another good, Emily, I know you mentioned big interview, but I don't know, did you bring up that our interview rooms are available for students to book? So no,
that's a good point.
When we are on campus and there's availability in the Career Center, all of our interview rooms that our employers are able to come in and do face-to-face interviews, our students can also book for both phone interviews and Skype or Zoom interviews. We have all of the equipment there. We have cameras because we want them to have a quiet space to be able to feel comfortable doing that in for that specific reason, because the cell phone doesn't always work, and it also gives you an opportunity to know that you're in a place where probably the software is going to work in the connection, because testing your equipment is a big thing too. If you log in and your audio is not working or the visuals aren't working, like you want to make sure you have access and it's all working prior to that.
That's awesome. I would highly recommend doing that.
Yeah. It's way better than the roommates and the dogs barking and the like posters that you're trying to hide in the background just to have like a blank, clean slate.
I will say that Zoom does have some pretty awesome ways to like put a different background for We've had a couple of people using that. There's some really nice like New York City style office settings.
Yeah, that is nice. And have you noticed, just because I'm sure you've done so many virtual interviews, if candidates are having any kind of technical issue, is it usually sound or video? Is it something that could have been tested out before? Like, what do you think the most common issue that people run into is?
Definitely microphone. For whatever reason, your computer sometimes with all the different, so like we use Microsoft Teams at PPD, we use WebEx at PPD. This is Zoom, I think, right? Yeah, some people use Zoom. There's Blue Jeans, I think. There's all these different systems, and for each one, when you download it, it's connecting individually to your computer in some way. I'm not a techie person, so I don't know exactly how that works, but the microphone portion is definitely the one that we see people with the most issues with, and it's super easy to fix if you can be prepared ahead of time.
And I definitely want to leave it open to any questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put one in the chat. But one that I don't think we have talked about yet is attire. You know, virtual interviewing doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to come prepared. So could you share your thoughts on, you know, attire and how important that still is?
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to it looking like you're taking it seriously, I feel like it gives you also to dress professionally. It really puts yourself in the mindset that you're in an interview. It gives you that extra boost of confidence. There's been studies on it that say if you dress for what you want, then you're, I don't know, however that works. There's research that shows that it does. But also you want to dress for success regardless if it's virtual or not.
I agree, because it's such a great first impression, and it can make you stand out compared to other candidates. And I think it's important too to kind of be aware of how an outfit might come across virtually. Like we have students who do big interview assignments and they record themselves, and technically what they're wearing was somewhat professional, but maybe it kind of looked off in the camera. Like it didn't really do it justice the way it kind of, you only get your top half in. So it's something to be aware of too, just kind of really being conscientious about what outfit you're choosing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also I do want to say too, you don't need to go out and buy something brand new also for your interviews. You can work with what you have, and like as long as it just looks polished and put together, it doesn't always have to be a full suit. So like I hate to see students who, you know, have to like are going out and buying all of this new stuff, and you don't feel like you have to do that, especially if you don't have the means to.
Yeah. And that's something, again, I can't wait until we're back on campus, because something the Career Center has been working on is a career closet. We're getting donations of professional clothing, blazers, work skirts, where students can kind of get, you know, access to that kind of thing without going out and having to spend a bunch of money for one interview, or you can kind of collect stuff over time. But again, yeah, don't have access to that until we're back on campus. That's something we are working on.
That's great. Mm-hmm. And also the students know too that anything that they get out of there is appropriate without question. So we're doing an interview. That's great.
I also think, and I know you mentioned it before, just the environment that you're in, but being aware of the lighting of the room that you're in. I have done some interviews where if there's like blinds behind people, it's that weird black lighting and the darkness over the face. And so like, I know now that we're on Zoom, those of us that have our camera on, we can see ourselves. So just making sure you're aware, like if you log in early, how you look, because it could look very different. You think you're in a well-lit room, but if lighting's behind you or it's not, it really can make a difference on how that looks to the person that's on the other side of the screen.
Absolutely, yeah. And even just if the light's coming from behind, your expressions and everything are going to be shadowed too. So that mimicked eye contact, that your expressions, all of that could be covered by shadow, which would be good.
Yeah. Great. Well, any other questions of the group? I mean, this is the time to ask any kind of inside scoop on interviewing, or maybe experiences that you've had that you've been wondering about. We are definitely open to some more questions. Just check the chat. Oh, somebody asked, what is a resume snapshot?
Oh, yeah. So for PPD's applicant tracking system, it offers for you to copy and paste your resume in, so that when recruiters are looking at your profile, your resume actually just comes right up into your profile rather than having to open up an attachment. So a lot of the bigger applicant tracking systems do offer this. And just having that resume snapshot in your profile could really set you apart from another candidate who maybe when they scroll to the next candidate, it just says see attached resume. You could like be kind of one step ahead in making that recruiter's job easier, but also it just shows too that you've really completed a full application and have done above even what's required of you.
Agreed. And I think there's nothing worse than when you see that see attached resume and they're missing dates or key information, and it doesn't even have everything you're looking for. And you're like, well, that would have been good for you to read through the application and kind of include that there. So yeah, and that just shows, I think, you're serious about the company. And same thing with a cover letter too. Cover letter is your chance to really kind of put your personality into why you're so interested in the company and the position. So again, it's just kind of making you stand out among the crowd, which is really helpful. Great. And then if anyone else has any questions, feel free to chime in. But Alicia, I also want to give you a chance to tell the group a little bit about maybe what positions you're hiring for, or a little bit more about PPD if you wanted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are hiring for a variety of positions right now. Just as I'm sure there are a lot of other companies right now, you know, things we're adjusting and pivoting a little bit in what we're doing due to COVID-19. But a lot of the roles that we do have available right now are in our medical communications. We have a lot going on there. Those types of opportunities are great for people interested in customer service and handling inquiries, and really having a hands-on approach to how people who are actually using our drugs and products are experiencing them. So that's a really impactful and great role that does so much for our trials and our clients. We also do have some internship opportunities that are open to start this coming fall. So far, though, those opportunities are specific to the clinical research program. But with that being said, we're really hoping to broaden those choices out as well. And then over the next couple of months, we are anticipating an increase in a lot of different entry-level roles and internships too. So you guys, I'll keep in close contact with you guys in career services so that everybody's aware of what's coming down the pipeline, hopefully. And but other than that, we update our career site, www.ppdi.com/careers, every day. Each and every one of our positions that we have is posted on there, and each and every application is reviewed individually by the actual recruiter that's working on those specific roles and working with the hiring teams. So so that's a really great place to keep an eye out for opportunities. And our career site does have this really great option where if maybe what you're looking for isn't there right now, you can select keywords and titles and things like that, that as soon as something with those keywords pops up, it'll go ahead and email you, so you don't feel like you have to keep checking back in every day.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing.
And correct me, I'm sorry if I'm wrong too, Alicia. I just want to make sure, because you guys are such a closely working employer partner with the university, any of those more like early career positions, you also post in Handshake as well, correct? Yeah, okay. I thought so. I just wanted to make sure. I know a lot of the students have access to that too. So and let them know that you do currently keep that updated too.
Yeah, and I did forget to mention as well, even though we are in Wilmington, our labs nationally are also hiring. So if you do have a background in chemistry or biology or a degree in a lab, then we have a lot of opportunities there as well, where you can work on some pretty cool life-changing therapies. So.
And you also have a corporate office in Raleigh, right? I think labs are there, but you also do hiring for a corporate office in the Raleigh area as well.
Yeah, we have our corporate office in Raleigh actually has just about the same amount of employees as our corporate headquarters in Wilmington. It's a really, really large location for us, and we hire pretty much the same positions there as we would at our corporate headquarters as well.
Awesome, and we do have a couple of questions coming into the chat. So one of them being, I know we talked about when you're interviewing virtually, taking advantage of maybe having a notebook beside you or having a little bit more info prepared. Do you have any advice on, the question was having information up on your screen, like in a notepad, like a digital notepad, so you have a little bit there with you? Is that advice you would give, having a little bit prepared in that way?
Yeah, I don't think that could hurt. I also think that would actually be better than having it on handwritten, because you can more easily look down at that and still keep the eye contact on the camera. So that's a really good point that I actually hadn't thought about before, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think the key there it would probably have to be very, very bulleted. I think you couldn't have like a full paragraph of notes because it's just going to seem a little bit more inorganic. So I think that's probably a good tip, but maybe just much more bigger picture, or maybe, you know, the names, if you have the schedule up of who you're interviewing with, that sort of thing.
That's a great point. Any notes that you are bringing to an interview should really be super, like, just phrases or bullets. You don't want to go ahead and handwrite out any answers or anything like that, because you just have no idea like how off track you can really get, and lose yourself, and then it just doesn't look good.
Yeah, and that's where the preparation really comes in, because you can use all your time beforehand to really prep and get your experiences and your skills and your stories ready. And that way, when it's time in the interview, you only need a couple key reminders and then they'll kind of come to you. But that way you're not, like you said earlier, sounding too rehearsed, where you sound like, oh, I'm ready for this question and I'm going to give you my whole answer. So just a little bit more organic there.
Well, and I think you need to, treat a virtual interview, even though it can be slightly more uncomfortable, just like you would a face-to-face, right? Like you wouldn't be in a face-to-face interview constantly looking down at your notebook or writing 4 pages of notes. Well, you shouldn't be. Also tips, so if you have questions prepared, you can read from it, but you really want to be as engaged as possible, even more so virtually than face-to-face, because it's that much more difficult.
Great. And then something else someone mentioned in the chat, which I'm going to have to ask, maybe someone on my team will know. Do UNCW students get access to Zoom? Do they get free Zoom accounts, or is that they do? Yeah, well, somebody said here, you can also record yourself beforehand on applications like Zoom, play and watch it back and make sure everything looks good and your mic is working. So just a little extra tip for practicing, making sure your lighting's all right, a little bit beforehand. So great advice, thank you. And there is another question in here, so I just want to pull this up. Somebody asked, I am learning what LinkedIn is, and I wonder what connecting with people on LinkedIn can do for me. Great question.
Yeah, great question. LinkedIn is amazing. So many employers are actually doing a lot of hiring and seeking professionals through LinkedIn, but in addition to that, it's just growing your professional career. You never know who you could connect with that could really take your career to the next level, or maybe you could even offer them help with their career too. So it's just a great place to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward, having professional picture. You can use use that site to really like show what's on your resume too. You can even have your resume on there. There's a lot of different ways to use LinkedIn. And even if you're not looking for a job, LinkedIn is a great place also to just kind of stay in touch with people on a professional level. But also there's a lot of resource sharing through LinkedIn, like articles and webinars, and there's just so much that LinkedIn offers. So.
Yeah, we would consider it, Bill, in the Career Center, like the #1 networking tool from a professional standpoint. It's an opportunity really for you to brand yourself as a professional, who you are, what you're passionate about, what you might want to do in the future, things you're involved in, your engagement, the work experience that you have. So it really is that electronic resume to brand yourself. And I will say, having a recruiting background, and I know Alicia comes from the same type of environment that I do, recruiters are using LinkedIn heavily. It's almost like a search engine for them when it comes to finding candidates. So keywords, things that you want to be involved in, careers that you want, all of those things can kind of give you search engine optimization in the eyes of a recruiter when they're searching for candidates for jobs or internships. So it's very important for you to have, and also make not just connections, but good connections, the right connections. You're coming to a career fair, you're taking business cards, you're connecting with those recruiters. You're connecting with people in the Career Center, you're connecting with other students. You might be connecting with alumni companies that you're interested in working in. So all of those pieces of it are super important.
Yeah, and the one thing I would definitely mention about LinkedIn is I think it's important to look at it as a platform that can definitely work for you and make connecting with people a lot easier. It's not just a profile that you need to complete and then you never look at it again. I think one of the best ways to utilize LinkedIn is to, have a great profile, but then connect with people, be posting content that's relevant to your industry, if you're more active on LinkedIn, you're going to get more connections, you're going to get more people sharing your information, you're going to just learn more about your industry, people in your industry. It just makes it, it just feels more robust than if you just complete your profile and then never look at it again, which is nice. Let's see here. Oh, I thought that was another question, but it was not.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
So sometimes you see these job descriptions where they're kind of vague, I guess, or maybe most of it makes sense to you and you're like, I think this is the perfect job for me, but then there's a couple of job duties that you don't exactly understand. Do you think it's a bad idea or a good idea to ask about some of those, to get the person who's interviewing you to elaborate on some of the job duties that you aren't exactly sure about?
Yeah, I would say it's worthwhile. I always say too, though, that you should definitely be applying to positions where you don't meet every single one of those like key responsibility kind of areas for. It's not always black and white like that with what the needs of the role are, and who knows, you may have a soft skill that's really missing from that team that could also add a benefit. So I wouldn't weigh too heavily on all of those, but if you have a lot of what's needed, then that's worthwhile. But in terms of asking about those questions, I think it can't hurt to bring them up and ask, but I also wouldn't want somebody to be like, well, I don't have any of this stuff, does that matter? But rather kind of just play into more of the strengths in those areas that you do have. I think it'd be more important to focus on that.
Yeah, and I think a good way to spin it is if there are pieces of the job that you haven't done before or you're not really familiar with, see if you can do a little research on your end and say, hey, I know this is part of the job and it's really important. I looked into it and I think it's going to entail this and this and this. That's something I'm interested in. So you could even show your interest by researching it a little bit, and that kind of definitely makes you stand out rather than saying, I'm not really sure what that is. It just is a little bit more robust and it kind of opens the conversation a little bit more.
Well, and I think that that was a good conversation that we had in one of our other sessions when someone talked about applying for jobs. There's a big difference in qualifications and job duties, because you might be fully qualified for a job, but you just haven't worked, in that type of environment before. So if you can check off all the qualification boxes, like if it's asking for 3 to 5 years of CRA experience, or if it's asking for a bachelor's degree, maybe you haven't worked in their specific system, or you haven't worked in that specific pharmaceutical environment, but you have all of the qualifications. That's a role that you still want to apply for. You may just need a little bit more understanding and guidance when it comes to the related duties of the role, but you're completely capable of doing the job and you're qualified for it.
That's a great point.
All right. Any other questions anybody would like to ask about interviewing, virtual tips and tricks? All right. Well, if anyone has any more information, definitely feel free to reach out to us at the Career Center. We are now fully integrated into Handshake. So if you have not logged into your Handshake account and made an online appointment, feel free to do so. You can meet with a counselor to do mock interviews, job searching tips, if you're looking for an internship, anything like that. All of our services, we've always had virtual services, but particularly right now in this climate, come make an appointment with us, come connect with us. And thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Alicia, for all the great information.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Thank you guys so much for having me. Wishing everyone the best of luck.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.